Embrace your weird ass, cool, fun self. Stop getting small. Stop being boring millennial gray yoga teacher. Get out of our own way and don't be afraid to be different. And don't be because different equals yourself. The successful businesses adapt. You are running a business in some form or another, even if you're teaching one studio class a week and nothing else.
I'm Ula, creative director. I'm also a writer, a yoga teacher, photographer, and designer, which is why I get to work with Brea so much at Heart and Bones.
And I'm Brea, and I am the founder of Heart and Bones Yoga, lead teacher, but we also have a whole slew of fabulous teachers for our teacher trainings and inside the Heart Bones online yoga studio. So yeah, hi.
So, okay, first off, you may have noticed a name change, especially if you've been a long-time listener. First off, thank you so much for being here and sticking around with us. You saw a name change and you know what is up. So we are now called the Yoga Teacher Podcast, formerly known as Move with Love. And then before that, it was formerly known as the Heart and Bones Podcast. So just like yoga itself, this podcast has evolved, which led us to today's topic. A name change is huge and also natural, as really we should all be evolving as teachers, business owners, and humans. So we're going to talk about what it really looks like to grow and adapt as a yoga teacher and how your yoga business can evolve right along with you. Brea, I think like step one, it's like defining what does it even mean when you are a yoga teacher and you hear evolve your teaching and business. What does that actually mean in like a really practical term for you?
I think it means that we are staying nimble and aware of how things change in life. Like if any of us who have been running businesses since 2020, what's known as the pandemic times, we would know that stuff is changing. Any of us who have been on social media for any length of time, we know that is changing all the time. And as humans, and what yoga teaches us and reminds us and helps us through it is knowing that change is inevitable. Change is like what's that famous saying, the most constant thing in life is change. And so, yeah, and taxes, death and taxes or something.
Yeah. Death and taxes.
And change, yes. So this is the updated version or whatever it is. So we've all heard that kind of anecdote or that quote. So too should our businesses evolve. So change doesn't mean like a 180. We have to be aware of the setting that we're in, the world that we're in, and adapt. The successful businesses adapt. And if you teach yoga, you are running a business in some form or another. Even if you're teaching one studio class a week and nothing else, there is always things that you're going to be doing and adapting just as a teacher. As you get more comfortable doing what you're doing, you're going to naturally evolve. That's the whole point.
Yeah, I think change can be a really tough thing for people. I think there's a lot of emotions attached to it. I think when we have like, especially naming something, like going back to the podcast, like naming things, like as someone who has built brands, people really get, they feel personal. They have an attachment to a name. They get like, there's these things we just don't want to change. It feels like it's a personal piece of your, like, but it's me, it's part of me, And yeah, so as someone has like gone into businesses and helped people make the changes, I totally get the resistance behind it. And it's funny. So I just want to go back to the naming change even, like, it started with Move with Love, which I think now looking at like the podcasts which are available on Spotify kind of aligns with like the naming conventions of a lot of podcasts. It's like personal, it's you, it's all these things. Then we realized, okay, but it's actually Heart and Bones, which is like how people would find us or know us. So then we changed it to Heart and Bones. But then we realized, who are we talking to and how are they going to find us? Well, it's actually a yoga teacher podcast, and I don't think you need to be a teacher to listen to this. But that's like a big part of it, right? So it's this like funny kind of evolution. And I think to me, it's actually being like practical and understanding what your goals are as well. Being willing to change to get from here to there, kind of is how I think of it. For me, I'm like, I think about this a lot, but for our listener, as a teacher, how can they tell if they are growing or kind of just repeating the same year of teaching again and again?
That's a beautiful tension to be in. And I use the word tension very intentionally because we're always going to be growing and we're always going to some of our core beliefs and core sense of selves should stay the same. And so how do you know if you're growing? How do you know if you're being stagnant? And I think let's bring it down to the microcosm of our classes and the worries and fears that people have with their sequencing. So I think a lot of times teachers are worried about sequences being boring. Okay, I taught the same pose for 5 weeks in a row. People need something new and novel and different. And like maybe and maybe not. And so if we can get comfortable as a teacher in how we sequence our classes to have familiarity, as well as adding something fun and new, it's going to be kind of the same with our businesses or with our teaching. I think downward dog is downward dog. There's only so much you can do with downward dog. You don't need to reinvent downward dog every single time that you teach it. People also really need familiarity. It's really supportive for the nervous system. So you as a teacher, I think we're always going to be riding that line, riding that tension of like honestly, I've some of my teaching jokes, like when I teach a workshop or a class, I've been saying that stuff for like 20 years. The same, but no, but I love it because often now when I teach in person, I'm traveling into other countries and places. So they haven't heard my like the same joke about X pose or whatever that I said 20 years ago. So it's a new audience. But does that mean I should have a new set of jokes? Well, if it's the same class and they've heard Bree's little like quip about down dog, let's say, yeah, maybe I should evolve what I'm saying about that in that kind of sense. But does that make sense? So like, we don't always have to reinvent the wheel, and that's a lot of pressure on ourselves to do that.
I think a two-parter for me is if you're not even checked into your own classes because you're an autopilot. If you're checked out, I mean, that could be a multitude of things. You can have a day where you're checked out, but if it's like status quo to you is just like go in and just like rote memorization because you've been blah blah, like to me that's maybe not so much about you as a teacher, you're doing something wrong. I don't see that. Where I see that, maybe this is my creative side. I know as a creative person, I actually have to fit in time into my week and my year to grow as a creative. And I think that also is the reality of a yoga teacher. So like I try to set aside a couple hours every week for my writing. I often start my days with journaling. And that's not like I'm taking a course, but maybe I'm reading something that I could learn from. And then yes, maybe once a year I do invest in an online course or something like that. And I think as a creative, I can get stagnant and not grow because I'm not attuned to what's happening in the world around me. Like I'm not like plugged into everybody else. And I think you could still teach the same sequence. Let's say you want to teach them that's like more a set traditional sequence every day, but our language around yoga and inclusivity and thing has deeply evolved over the past couple of years. You can do both. Like you can teach the same sequence and also adapt your language to be inclusive, right? So to me, it's like if you're checked out or you're just like you have a script that you never deviate from, I'd be like, whoop, maybe give yourself some time, a day off, go get re-inspired, go learn something.
That's the answer. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we don't have to change yeah, exactly. I vote yes on that one, Ula.
Vote yes. Okay, so I want to get kind of a little nitty gritty just because you have so much experience. You're like 20 plus years. You also teach teachers. So I was just thinking like really practically, like what are, let's just say out of thin air, 3 skills that a teacher really must evolve if they want to keep their classes relevant and impactful today?
Well, I think you answered at least one of those, right? So being able to evolve to continue to be more inclusive. Like really people, my friends listening to this as teachers, again, the yoga world historically and maybe in a lot of places still prioritize able-bodied people who are super flexible, people who look a certain way, etc. And so like let's just change that. Let's just prioritize more people so that more people can get the benefits of this beautiful practice. So what Ula had already said, absolutely that. Keep evolving. How can I be more inclusive? How can I be more mindful? How can I offer this to more places that don't have access to yoga quite in the ways that some other people do? So boom, Ula already answered that. Second one, I'm going to say maintain your own practice, but I'm going to say that with a caveat. I think historically, I know for me in my early days, so in the early 2000s, it was definitely like your own practice is unrolling a yoga mat for an hour or an hour and a half every single day. And, I feel like I say this all the time in this example because I just never was this person. And I really struggled with that type of practice and that type of consistency. And so I want to have the caveat of saying, granted, and again, if that's you and you can get onto your mat every day, oh my God, enjoy it. Love that. For me, it's like redefining what practice means. And so I think, of course, like doing short little 20-minute stretches for yourself or doing a meditation practice for 5 minutes, or what Ula mentioned earlier of writing in a journal or a sketch practice, like just going and like drawing and doodling or like whatever these things are. It doesn't necessarily have to be asana based practice. I think any sort of something that fills us up is a practice. And whatever that fills us up, going for a walk consistently with your dog at 8 a.m. every day, like, I'm making this up, but like some sort of thing that reconnects you to your source, whatever your source is, the source of yourself. If it's something bigger, however we want to define it, that's the practice. And then that will fuel our teaching. So what connects you? What hooks you into the magic of the world or the land that we're on, right? The beauty of nature, creativity, yoga asana, whatever it might be, but anything that brings you joy. Maybe, okay, now my mind's just racing with all these fun ideas of what practice could be. So one of the other ones that pops into my mind is like committing to dancing to your favorite songs for 5 minutes a day. Like, I hope, right? What brings you joy, what brings you sustenance to make it through a chaotic world. That's our practice. And then that will come into our teaching. So that's 2. And then 3 would be community. Like, do you have teachers that you can learn with and learn from? And we live in this beautiful digital world right now. Like, it's so utilized. So if you live in a community that you have where you don't quite have teachers that you resonate with, or it's hard to find like-minded colleagues, online, find teachers online. Of course, I'm going to plug Heart and Bones online because if you're listening to this podcast, you probably like what we do. And if you're not already a member of Heart and Bones online, like all of the teachers, not just myself on that platform, on our platform, will feel like friends, right? Because we're teaching these inclusive ways. We're professionally unprofessional in the sense that it feels like we're in the room there for you. So having these ways of finding people that you can just take a class. And then one of us might say something, or that other person might say something that you're like, oh, I've never heard that cue before. I love that. And then that might just be the little spice to add to your teaching to keep it feeling fresh for yourself and for your students.
So good. The last point, especially, actually, all of them are really great. The practice as well. I think that evolves with you, right? Your personal practice will evolve. And I think of like any other, let's call it sport, the coach on the sideline coaching someone to run 100 meters, I don't expect them to run 100 meters at the same pace as the person they're coaching. Like, just because you're at the front of the class doesn't necessarily mean you have to be doing exactly, you know what I mean? Like, it can actually look different. You're bringing a skill set to the class. That's what that's why you're there, is to help others in their practice. So your practice can look a little different. The second piece is, and I know some people are going to cringe, it's like the networking side of things. And I know you're talking about like learning from other people, but in my mind, I was like, I already do this as part of my creative practice. I have phone calls with people. Later this month, I'm having another call with someone that I met through LinkedIn, of all places. And she's just so lovely and kind of side biz, not the same, but we learn from each other. We subscribe to each other's email. We email back and forth. So, other photographers I have phone calls with. But yes, because I think being a yoga teacher can feel isolating, very much so. So building out that network, and for inspiration, sustenance, and learning, there's just like, networking is not a dirty word. It can be really good.
I love that, Ula. I really love that. That's really cool. And I actually think that's really neat that you do that. I think that's really cool because you're right, because connection is so inspiring. I'm sure once you get off those calls with those colleagues or just people in your same sort of field, that you leave probably feeling happy and inspired, and that and that they would too. Like, so would you say the action that some teachers could listen to this as they're hearing that? Because I think for me, that's sort of like, the introverted part of me is like, whoa, like you did what? And so if anybody's like me, listening to this, what would be the actions, like finding, so, okay, how about this? And would you say, because I'm thinking so many of us are on social media, whether we love it or hate it, and probably a bit of both, we're on social media. And I bet there's so many people that you follow on social media that you're like, I feel like we would be friends. And then if you like, and I'm sure if you just DM them and reached out to them and was like, oh my God, I love what you're doing. I love all your posts. It really resonates. Hey, would you ever want to just like, I'm assuming Ula, and jump in, Ula, if like, because you've literally done this, so I'm making this up of how one would do this. So what would you say in that sense?
First off, I am an introvert. Let's be clear. I'm so happy. Like, I know I joke my years of service industry and retail. I can I love talking to you, so this is fun and all that stuff, but I do get drained, so I'm 100% introvert. So if someone out there is like, this sounds like a nightmare, I'm an introvert, I get you. There's a reason I have like a phone call with the person, and it's not every week, it's like once a month I do this thing, right? And I think being honest with what you appreciate never goes wrong. It's really hard to be like I literally opened my inbox today and saw my YouTube about what I learned about writing on Substack, and she emailed me to tell me how it inspired her to also try Substack, and she's also a photographer. So I'm going to reply to it after this podcast, but I could never reply negatively to that. To me, right? I'm like, wow, that's massive, right? So whether or not her and I end up talking more, it's not the point. I think if you're coming from a generous place and you're acting without this like expectation, it will be well received. And if the person doesn't reply, who cares? Just like water off your back, moving on. I think putting more good out into the world is never a bad thing. So complimenting and thanking someone is always like a good little entry, and then go from there. I just always try to be generous on these calls. Like, what can I give you information wise? And they generally reciprocate, and it's good.
This is an amazing story, Ula. Also, Ula will be linking your Substack and your YouTube channel so that people can like follow you. Go to the show notes. But I love that so much because it's so true. Hey, like it's like I so appreciate over the years when people decide to actually literally take the time, send a DM, and they're like, and not looking necessarily to like meet up as a convo, but like just, yeah, we had somebody just the other day leave a really, really lovely voice note about this podcast. And it's like, don't ever, like, we're all still human. I don't want anybody ever also to be like, oh, well, they're like, they have, blah, blah, or whatever. Like, I don't, what words did I just say? None, but like, sort of, but that's how meaning, they're like whatever stories we have about why we wouldn't reach out to somebody, which, yeah, just reach out, because it's all, I think you're right. The generosity is so appreciated. It's so, because nothing gets my goat more than gatekeeping. And there's this sort of like gatekeeping vibes that can happen all over the world with all sorts of things. So I have a real thing about gatekeeping. So I think, Ula, you named generosity so perfectly. And the more we're generous with each other, the more we're all going to win. Why do we have, it's collaboration over competition, and then we're engendering more goodness in the world. And as we love to talk about in this podcast, then we're dismantling. That's one little way, little dart into the systems of power. So in case this is your first time listening to us, we always talk about at least once, I'm sure, systems of oppression, systems of power. So when we're not being collaborative, or we're being collaborative, when we're being generous, that is such a win. So heck yes, thank you for this, Ula. Yes.
Okay, so I don't even know if I want to ask this, because now we've talked about what should you be working on evolution wise, right? We talk about practice, networking, all those kind of things. But is there anything that you think right now, looking at the yoga world, that you see teachers holding on to that you think no longer really serves students today?
Just a pause, big sigh. That's a huge question. I don't know. I think I think at the core and at the heart of that question, the first thing my mind goes to, rather than like little things of like, change this kind of cute, like, let's always go, yeah, my brain goes to the surface, or like tries to go under the surface. And we want to get to the heart of things and get over ourselves with love. I say that with so much love. We need to get out of our own way and not make this about ourselves. Like, go listen to the 10 things or the things I no longer do as a teacher episode that just came out. So it was the one just before this one, because holy guacamole, we talk a lot about all of this stuff in ways. And I think at one point towards the end of the podcast, we were talking about being selfish or something, and we're just talking about the self. And so there's some really great deeper conversations about like how to get out of our own way. But I think that's a big one. I think the imposter syndrome is so real, and it's part of our practice. It's a part of our practice of yoga, of learning about the self and just getting more confident and clear and celebrating our wins and being like full of ourselves in a really good way. Because I don't think most teachers are not in danger of becoming egomaniacs and total jerks. So I think we could all have a little bit of room to be like, yeah, actually, I taught a really great class. Actually, I'm really happy with the way that I handled that situation with that student, right? So that is going to because why are we doing this? Because we want to help people. And when we're helping people, when we're not thinking about ourselves and worrying about how bad and good and then we're helping people. So at the very least, teachers, let's just continue to get out of our own way so that we can share this beautiful wisdom tradition that actually makes a big difference in people's bodies, hearts, minds, and lives. That would be my main answer. Yeah.
And I think nowadays, where in the past it was less likely to happen, nowadays it's so easy to compare ourselves, and it's really easy to get in our own way and in our own heads, because we do have social media. We can kind of creep people and follow them and go check out their websites. It's like, whereas in the past that wasn't a thing. And yeah, the past, it was different. It had its own problems, but I can definitely see people kind of what you were saying, like if we can get out of our own way and stop this comparison train of some of it would probably benefit us and our students quite a bit. Speaking of getting out of our way, I want to talk about building our own sustainable businesses as a teacher, because I think there's like the evolution of our teaching, and then there's going to be like the evolution of our business, and we kind of touch on it with like the name of the podcast. But if a teacher, let's just like bare bones, let's say start with like, if a teacher wants to evolve from teaching a drop-in class and to build like more of a sustainable business, I know this could be a whole podcast on its own, and I think we actually did one on this. We probably have a whole podcast on this if you look. But what is something that people could, do today to start that evolution into something a little bit more sustainable?
Build relationships. I think so, similar to what Ula was saying earlier about like building relationships with colleagues or people in like similar industries or whatnot, or just people you think are interesting and want to like learn from.
Oh my God, just interesting people. I think I get more out of that, because like you get out of your head. If you just like someone and like whatever it is that they're doing is cool, like it'll probably work out better versus like being like gatekeepy, like I want their thing.
Yeah, and comparison. And so also comparison keeps us small, being like, oh, well, they're so cool. They're doing so many things. I don't want, and like, I'm never going to like write those stories. Yeah. And so like, but also sidestep or same step in some ways, because it's all relevant. What makes somebody cool? What makes somebody interesting? Because they're being themselves. So do you see how it's like back to like get out of our own way and don't be afraid to be different, and don't be because different equals yourself. So the most interesting people, in my opinion, are the people who step outside of these systems and decide to go, wait, who am I? Actually, I love that weird thing. I'm going to embrace it. The weird thing that culture says is weird or whatever it might be, collecting stamps. I don't know, like whatever it might be, like embrace your weird ass, cool, fun self, because that's where your secret sauce is as a person for your own personal evolution. The more ourselves that we can be, the better. And if that happens to look weird to the mainstream or to most people, oh well.
And being yourself, that's like so key.
Yeah, because people will change with you. Okay, so anecdotally, let me share when I started teaching in around 2012, 2013 was when I was starting to change how I used to teach. So I got into more of an anatomy informed approach. I started taking classes outside the yoga world around anatomy, and I was bringing that back into my classes. Okay, friends, I changed in a lot, like the core Brea didn't change. My wacky, wild, wonderful self was pretty much always going to be there and will continue to be here. But the way that I was teaching my classes did change. And I lost some people. So this is what's going to happen. So all of this conversation so much is rooted in changing and evolving our businesses and ourselves. When change happens, you might lose some people because they may not like the change, and that's okay. But if this change is authentic to you, it's going to, and the relationships that you have built hopefully are based on like healthy, functional relationship skills. Hopefully, most of the people will change along with you. Or if you're honest about the change. So for me, I started to tell people a little bit. I got skilled over time. I think I overtaught and overcompensated because I was really not trusting that everybody, like I knew doing a more anatomy informed approach made sense. It felt good in people's bodies. But I also knew it was a little bit different maybe from what I had been doing. And so I kind of had to like oversell it in my mind a bit. I was like, hey, okay, so we're doing this because, and I like oversold and I maybe overtalked. So I learned how to refine it a bit better. But absolutely, not everybody loved it. I remember literally one guy specifically who had not been to my classes in years started to come back to my classes around those times. And he's like, I really like the way that you used to teach better. And in that moment, this is why it's so important to have, yeah, like so Ula just did for those listening, did the like,
Stabbing
arrow to the heart mode. Yeah. And this is why I always go back to like, well, who am I as a teacher, and staying clear on that core, solid part of you. And luckily at that point, I was fairly clear, though it was new, I was still fairly clear that how I evolved my teaching was better. And I've always loved this example because I'm proud of how I said it, because I know old people pleaser Brea might have been a little less succinct in a previous time. But what I said to him, I'm like, okay, I get that. Fair enough. Totally. I did change what I was doing. I can see that you would have liked that. But I'm changing because I think this was about 10-ish years into my teaching. So I'd already been a teacher for 10 years before I kind of evolved into more of the anatomy informed. And I said, well, first of all, no matter what I'm doing, I hopefully, because this gentleman had been to some of my early classes. He was one of my first kind of students, and he's liked that better apparently. And so, but I was like, well, first of all, I've been teaching for 10 years. I hope that I've evolved. The teacher that I was 10 years ago is not the teacher that I am now. And I'm happy for that. And then I said, secondly, with that experience, and I've been taking all this other education, I know why I'm making this change. I'm not just haphazardly doing this change. There was a very clear intentions on why I was changing my classes. So I said, yeah, I'm doing this because I know it's better for people's bodies. And that's totally cool if you like the way that I was teaching before. But this is how I'm teaching now. Mm-hmm. And did he continue to come back? No, but was that because of this? Maybe. Who knows? Who cares, right? Like, clarity on who we are is always the win. Can help us navigate those sort of sticky scenarios where somebody might be like, I don't like what you're doing. You don't have to, and that's cool.
I don't want to skim over, because I think networking now has kind of been built, mentioned a couple times, like connection and community and networking. And when I think about building a business beyond a drop-in class, it's like, where do you, like, I think it's anywhere in life. Like, where do I get most of my clients? Referrals. How do I find the best restaurants? A friend tells me. How do I, and so it's like through this like natural generosity and relationship building, as cool opportunities pop up, maybe even it's not about the opportunity, but someone comes to you because they hear of a good idea. Like, I think that like that openness, if you have this like openness to like meeting and community and generosity, I think you will be able to build beyond a drop-in class, because the world is evolving, right? Like, we look at 20 years ago, people weren't teaching online yoga. So how did people go from that to now having a full-blown yoga studio online? Like, there's these like leaps of faith it was like, it's not a one person thing. Like, yes, you did it on your own, and also you had to bring in a designer, you had to bring in a web builder, you had to do all these things. Like, I think it's like easy to think that, oh, I have to do this on my own. And I guess where I'm going with this is, great news, you don't have to. Like, there's people out there that can support you. So I think like building that community muscle is really good. Are there any other, like, I'm doing the air quotes, muscles that you think yoga teachers ignore, but could be really critical in how their business evolves?
Let me circle back for 1 second on something that you just said, though, Ula, because I actually liked, if I'm remembering from my own experiences, just to add on, people also want to help you. That's what I've found. People are really like, give people a chance to help you. So that perception that, oh, I have to do it all my own and I have to work hard and it's going to be a struggle. But when you ask for help, most of the time people are more than happy. They're like, oh, you're starting this business? Oh, you're doing that? Oh, great. Good for you. Yay. And then that's maybe also a good barometer if you have a good community. Because if you do ask for help and nobody wants to help you, that's sad. And hopefully we can find a more supportive, loving, and wonderful community. But in my experience over the years, people want to help. I love helping people. Oh my God, it's so fun to like share and do that. So anyway, so just to add on that, trust that give people the chance to help you too. I think teachers probably willfully ignore, because don't we ignore the things we don't want to do? Things like marketing and promotion. Right. And it probably gives us the ick. And it probably gives most of us like, I just want to teach my classes. I don't want to have to build my website. I don't want to have to talk about myself. I don't want to have to do a flyer or promote in any sort of way. Go on social media. Social media makes me want to hide in a corner, right? Like, I think that's a pretty common reframe from a lot of yoga teachers. So yeah, and I get it. Marketing's hard. Putting yourself out there, not always fun. And if you do want to expand and grow your business and teaching in any form, there's always going to be a layer of having to put yourself out there. You have to put yourself out there to teach at a new studio most of the time, right? You have to go knock on that door and send an email or whatnot and be like, hey, and like, here's my resume. Like, there's always some sort of having to get out there. So if we can continue to get out of our own ways as best we can, have that vulnerability, know how to work with, because it's vulnerable. That's the heart of it. Underneath the lack of desire to put yourself out there is because we feel vulnerable. We don't want to get hurt. We don't want to be rejected. We don't want to hear no. We're scared of it. We're taught that that's a bad thing because we're also taught that mistakes are bad, that we should be experts immediately at everything. And if we're not, well, then we suck. Right? I'm thinking art, right? If you cannot draw somebody's face right off the bat perfectly realistic, well, you're not a good artist. Rather than the story of, hey, let's learn some tools and techniques in order to see that face in a different way so that you can learn to draw it well. And guess what? You're probably going to have to repeat drawing that over and over for it to get towards realistic. And none of that matters because you're drawing and it's fun. Right? This is the world that we live in that doesn't really set us up for that sort of thing. So then now we're here, yoga teachers, and we're not taught that failure, air quotes again, is a good thing, or how to handle failure. We're not taught how to handle no's and not take them as if, back to Ula's, knife in the heart movement there, like, right? And not like, that's like taking it personally, taking a no as if something's totally wrong with me. Imagine if we all grew up, and maybe you did, and if you did, God bless the adults in your life. But I think for most of us, we didn't grow up in worlds that gave us that muscle, the muscle of rejection, the muscle of vulnerability, the muscle of putting oneself out there with confidence, with a little bit more ease and being okay to do it. So maybe that's the muscle. So even marketing, maybe work a little bit on like, what do I feel vulnerable about? This is our practice. This is our yoga, right? Our yoga teaching is often our yoga practice, these deeper layers. So I would say, put yourself out there, be vulnerable. And I'm there with you, my friends. I'm like saying this not like I'm some ease that it's ever been easeful for me either. It's still to this day, I don't love it. But I do it because I have a bigger goal in mind, because I know I want to do this practice and I want to teach and I want to reach more people. And in order to do that, there's some layers of being vulnerable.
There's couple things. First, I want to flip the script on marketing. Not everyone doesn't like marketing. And so I think like going back to some of our episodes that talk about this a little bit, finding what works for you. I think it's like easy to default and say, oh, it's so hard to put yourself out there, blah, blah. I'm like, no, it's not. You just haven't found the thing that you like, to be honest. Like, you don't have to be on Instagram. You know, like I'm on Substack because I prefer to be there. It gives me the time to process my thoughts. I get to write. I get to, be in my inbox instead of on like an app. And not that I'm not on social media, but I've flipped how I function in my own marketing. And so I choose to do longer, slower formats because that's what I prefer. And then I cut that up into something smaller to go somewhere else, right? So the reason I want to say that is because, yeah, you might just not have found the thing that you loved. And I think like just being open to it. And the next thing is maybe you went into yoga if you were like me, where I didn't even think about teaching. I went into being a teacher trainer, I went into teacher training for myself. And then I discovered I wanted to teach. Okay, great. So then I started teaching at studios. And then this is what we're talking about. Okay, so how do I go from that drop in into that bigger? And here I want to almost like pause and be like, why? Maybe you don't have to, right? Because that shift from a drop-in teacher to building a business requires you to develop the skills of a business owner. And I love that. Brea loves that. It's hard sometimes, but it's also really fun. And like having clarity around that. So when I think of like muscles, I'm like, wah wah. It's like the business muscles. And like those are the muscles. And sometimes you might have to acknowledge that I don't even care about developing this muscle, so I might have to hire someone to do it. Like I don't do my own taxes. Hate that. I will not, you know what I mean? I will hire someone else to do that. So I think it's like the stories we tell ourselves. What's good, what's hard, like kind of reevaluating that. And we've mentioned a couple times like, exercises or reflection. So I do want to eventually get to that because I think I want people to walk away with like, run and journal on this topic. But before we do, are there any kind of like, in your experience, red flags that a teacher can look for that perhaps it's time to change their business model, or is like maybe their model a little outdated? Like in your experience, when were times that we were like, oop, it's time to, switch things up?
That's a really interesting question. And like 18 different things popped into my mind when you said it. And so let me just take a moment to try to collect, because I think there's so many layers to that, because what's working and what's not working can be for so many reasons, and so many reasons that we all like, I think we all don't know what we're doing to a point in a way, like, right, like in that classic, like we're all making this up as we go along. And I've never worked in a large multinational corporation, so I don't know. But part of me wonders, like, I bet even in governments, like there's no blueprint for this. Like there's no blueprint for, yes, there's expertise. Yes, there's knowledge, and there's putting all of that into practice. And so running a business in a world itself that is constantly changing, running a business of people themselves are constantly changing, right? Like we're all trying to catch up, and we're all kind of co-creating this world too in its own wild, big picture way. And so that's why I felt like I had like 18 things in my mind, because on one hand, I think it requires a sense of experimentation, trust, curiosity, and more experimentation. Because I know in our business with Heart and Bones, so Heart and Bones has been running officially as the online platform since 2018. Like that's been a lot of years. And the stuff that used to work in terms of, let's say, how we got new customers isn't working in the same way that it used to. Was that us? Did we do something wrong at some point and then that broke and now like, or is it because also the world changed? Or is it also because social media changed? Is it also because, in my mind, some ways, like we're all too digitally tired? And so there's this, back to that, I said it earlier, back to that sense of tension between like us, how your business is set up, how you are as a teacher, slash how the world is. And you're always having to sort of check in with yourself. You're sort of having to be aware of the world around us and find your own sweet spot and kind of experiment. I've used this example before, and on a really simple level, it's like sometimes if you have a class that wasn't successful, let's say you were running a workshop or a pre-registered class and nobody signed up, and you're like, well, crap, that was such a bad idea. I'm a bad teacher. Why did it, I'm making it dramatic, but hopefully we're not going that hard on ourselves. But let's just say, we take it personally. Something happened, I did something wrong, or it could have just been the name. It could have been the name of the workshop, or it could have been the time of day. I was just using this example before we started recording about a workshop that I put on in a city. And I was like, why? Like this should normally, like when I teach here, it normally fills up. And why is there like barely any people signing up for this? Because this was the type of workshop that I knew people would be traveling to come and attend. And then I realized that same weekend, unbeknownst to me, there was a huge like Coldplay concert and there was like a huge like tennis thing. And so all hotels in that city that previously I know prices were different were so much higher. And so I was like, okay, right, good, phew, that wasn't me, thankfully, hopefully. Like odds are people aren't signing up for this because those who needed to travel to get there looked at hotel prices and were like, oh, yeah, no, can't afford it. Right. So there's just like, there's so many layers of why something is working and why something isn't, that I don't have a good answer other than like playing with that tension between like always checking in. Is it me? Is it that? Is it me? What's going on in the world concurrently? Right? Like during COVID again, online, we were already established as a business because pre 2020, we opened in 2028, I mean, in 2018. And so us as an established online business, COVID happened. We were in a great position. So did Heart and Bones do really well because Heart and Bones is amazing? Hopefully, yes. But odds are it also did really well during that time because it also everybody was going online and we were already there. Right. So do you see how there's just so many factors? And anybody who's a parent, last one version of like example of this, anybody who's a parent, I think there's so many times where it's like, I only have one kid who's now 15, but I think about like people with two kids and maybe their first kid was fairly easy and they're like, and I'm just anecdotally from friends, and so some of you listening might resonate with this, being like, wow, thought to themselves, oh, I'm such a good parent, look at my kid, doesn't, my friends, they're having challenges, it's so easy. And then they have the second kid, same parents, right, same way of raising them, but that kid was different, and the things that were easy to raise and do with that first kid, you're trying to do the exact same things, and that second kid, it's not working, and they're like, oh, it's not just me, it's not me as the parent, it's like, oh, this is a different person that's not like. So I hope that's an example that sort of works for our business, like depersonalizing it and recognizing that we have to pivot all the time and be nimble like that.
I think you're actually so good at this too. So it's funny you have all these examples, and then back of my mind, I'm like, Brea and I have a monthly business call. Like literally, we look at the numbers, and it's not, I think, scary by any means. It's a big view, right? And we talk about this stuff, and I think if you're moving from like a drop into like building a business, it's like yes, you try new stuff all the time. Like this year we launched a yoga teacher mentorship program and it went really well. We're going to Tuscany, and I know you've done retreats in the past, but we did it differently this time, right? We changed some things and it made it a little, like, I don't know about you, but it felt really good. Like it was like, wow, that was like, it didn't have to be scary, it worked out, all that kind of stuff. So it's like this level. I think what you're great at, Brea, is you don't mess with like the thing that pays the bills and keeps the lights on, right? You're like, that is working. We're going to keep that going. But we have this like little wiggle room space where we're always testing out, we're experimenting new things. And I think that is like, no matter what kind of business you have or what kind of endeavor you're doing, you need that wiggle room where you can try something and you can even fail at it and it's a-okay. Because I know Brie and I talk about stuff where we're like, let's just try it. And then if we like don't like it, we could just like get rid of it. like,
Yeah.
like, we're not saving
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Hey. And I think so when you use that Tuscany example, it made me think of what that maybe hopefully for some of us this will resonate, because for me as a person, and I think we're all wired differently, but for me there's also a layer of intuition and trusting the wisdom of my body. And I attribute that to a couple decade old yoga practice of like, the physical side of asana and yoga has given me this opportunity to trust the somatic, like yes and no inside my body usually. Right. And so for the Tuscany example, so it was funny how COVID keeps coming up here. So like just before COVID happened, I was already like ready to retire from retreats. I was like, I'm over this. I've been doing this for years. I'm just the rigmarole of it. I'm over it, done. COVID happened. And I'm like, yes, validation, no more, done forever. And then I got DM'd and I get DM'd all the time on social from like retreat centers. And most of the time I ignore them. But then I just happened to look at this one in Tuscany. And for some reason, something told me to look. And I was like, okay, whatever. Even I remember even saying, look at it. And there was another voice in my head. It was like, Brie, why are you wasting your time? You never look at this shit. And then I looked and I was like, oh my God, this place is amazing. And then I like looked at the website, looked at the prices and da. And then so with why we decided to come out of like retreat retirement, because I had a very clear yes in my body. And I've learned in 45 years of being alive, I have learned to trust that, and in the business as well. And so that one was a lucky one, because I feel like that it's not always so clear in the yes, but that one was an absolute, like, actually yes. And then it filled up right away. We have one spot left available. I'm like, most of the time there's always like coming and going, and it's your rigmarole again. So I'm trusting the yes on that. And so a lot of times, yes, like we can be intellectual and should be intellectual and thoughtful about our business decisions and life decision. And then there's this other sort of validation of like, where's that sweet spot between like intellect and trust and intuition, right? Because again, these systems of power have taken us away from the ability to trust our inner wisdom. And yoga, this ancient wisdom practice, these wisdom traditions are all about bringing our power back, trusting the land, trusting the world around us, right? Like the rhythms of nature, the rhythms and knowledge of ourself. And so I like that sort of sweet spot, that tension, maybe, and going back to that example, that tension between like intellectual, yes, this is a good, intellectually good business decision, coupled with, and does it feel right in my body? And where's that sweet spot? And can I trust that
Oh
sweet
my
spot
God,
between the two?
Brie, you just like defined my like learnings of the 20s, my 20s, that like the feeling of I should say yes to this. Why? Because logically, I need to pay the bills. This like fits the blah blah. Maybe some ego tossed in there. This looks good. All this kind of stuff. But deep down inside, you're just like gonna hate every moment of it. And yes, sometimes as a business owner or as a yoga teacher, you will have to make these kind of like nudgy like sacrifices. Like, okay, it's still a business. I sometimes have to do stuff I don't like, but if you completely ignore that one side of yourself, it's not going to be a sustainable business, right? You're not going to grow. You're going to hate it. Maybe you'll burn out and do stuff you don't even really like. And it's scary, I think, to start to listen to yourself almost, because it might even be going against what society is telling you. The example that popped in my head, and it's kind of a scary one, but women and people that are not in power, not listening to times that they are in danger. And I know that's like a very extreme example, but
But it's a good one.
it is studied and it is real. And we tell ourselves, oh, it's just in your head, or like, oh, you're overthinking it, you're making up the story. And I'm like, no, like it's real to you and you should probably listen to it. And I also say this about people's emotions because sometimes I don't understand what someone's feeling, but I believe them. It's real to them. And if I can give someone else that grace, maybe you should give it to yourself. This doesn't feel good. Okay, believe yourself.
So good, Ula. Exactly. And that's like, and so there's the patriarchy that has taken us away. So that like, actually, that's such a great example. But I was talking about these systems of power, patriarchy being one of them, that takes that innate knowledge away and gaslights women and people who identify as women to like, you've got this beautiful internal warning system where your bullshit detector or your inner safety detector is like, this person's not good, or I shouldn't turn down that corner of that street because I'm not getting good vibes from this. But yeah, we're socialized to be like, well, sweet and kind, and no, 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 my friend. So I think many of us listening to this resonate with that example, Ula. And I think, and it's the same thing. So where's that beautiful, it's like science, because yoga is a science, they say, but it's also this like spiritual practice. And when I say spiritual, whatever that means to you, it's really just like wisdom, intuition, the things we can't see. I can't see my intuition. I can't quantify it. I probably can't do a research study on it unless people are doing that. And if so, that's really cool. And let me know. Who knows? But like it's like this unseen thing that also your intuition sounds like yourself. I sometimes have always felt like, okay, for me, in order to trust this intuition, it has to be this different voice in my head. Like, right, if you're psychic, it's like you get this clear vision or something, but it's that most of the time it just sounds like your own voice. So beautiful yoga. Thank you, yoga, to teach us to hone into that. So interesting kind of twist on the answer here, Ula, as we're talking about business. But I think we'd be amiss or remiss to not acknowledge that. I think, like for me, for sure, a huge part of my business comes from intuition, but it's that sweet spot. It's that connection. It's not pure intuition. And it's also me having to learn to hear my intuition. When is it my intuition? And when is it my fears? I still am kind of playing with that sometimes, like I have, like that's a skill to continue to hone, is when is it my fear and when is it not, or when is it both? But when it comes to that business, like that fine line, again, as where I was coming back to, like, do your yoga, do show up for yourself, learn about yourself more. And that's going to trust the wisdom of your body, trust the wisdom of your mind, and hopefully they can find their sweet spot in between.
That's so good. This actually kind of, I guess, segues really lovingly into, what can a teacher reflect on or do this week to help themselves kind of like stay in this space, be open to evolution as a teacher, maybe growing their business. Is there anything that you recommend? And I feel you kind of answered it, which is like the practice. But anyways, anything else,
Something more tangible.
Yeah.
I recognize that it's like what I'm saying is not, I don't think there are like, here's your 5 different ways to totally learn to trust your intuition. That's because
that's a lifetime.
There's a million. That's a lifetime. Yeah. And I think there's also probably a million ways that each of us were taught not to trust our intuition in different ways. So that's going to be kind of different for each of us, right? Some of us actually have always been like, what you're talking about. My intuition's never failed me, or I've never distrusted it, or I never had it smushed or whatever. So we're all different. So find your way in that. So let's go into some more tactile, tangible ways. I would suggest going back honestly, I think this is my go-to yoga teacher advice. I'm going to say it a million times. I'm going to say it a million times more. Why am I teaching? Write down, because there's something so important. This actually helps maybe that as we talk about that sweet spot of intuition. To me, it always feels like until I write something down, I think I know something. To me, it's like it's floating in my head. I'm like, no, I totally know that. Until I go to speak it or write it, like articulate it in one form or another, then I realize, oh, my why, let's say, as a teacher, if somebody was like, Brie, what's your why? Do you know what your why is as a teacher? I'd be like, sure, I do. But then if I had to articulate it, I'd be like, oh, maybe I don't know what that is. So I hope that makes sense. So like getting it out of the ether and the imagination in your head and into like words, whether that's verbally or writing, Write it down, get clear. Why am I teaching? Why am I doing this? Because I could be doing a lot of other things in my life. There's a beautiful world we live in. There's so many possibilities for our lives. And we've decided to teach yoga for some reason. What are those reasons? Why yoga? And get as detailed as possible. Not just, I don't want to hear, well, I'm not going to hear it. You're going to do this for yourself, but like, just, if you just put in, teaching yoga because it makes me feel good. And I want people to feel good. Well, what the hell does feeling good mean? Like, let's break that down. Give me 10 examples of what feeling good is. And then it's going to open up in your brain and you're going to go, oh, because feeling good could be, and it's going to be different for, like, I want people to feel good in who they are. I want people to feel, have their lower backs feel great. Like, right, like get specific on that.
I am going to harken back to our last episode of being a little selfish. I think not just like outwardly why you're teaching yoga for other people, why are you teaching yoga for yourself? Because I think you have to get clear on this, like, okay, so I'll give myself as an example, not for yoga, but just kind of the life I've built for myself for a very, very long time. And to this day, a big part of what I do was centered around my income is not tied to where I live. And I always made decisions around that. And sometimes it meant going in-house with a company, and sometimes it meant being a freelancer. It wasn't like I need to be a graphic designer. I was like open to this like creative life, but I wasn't willing to sacrifice this one thing. And the reason is personal, and like it's not like I can't say it. It's like my family lives everywhere but where I was, right? So I always had these like tensions of like I wish I could just go. And I realized that was like this major issue. And I think like for teachers, I think if you know this like deep-seated reasoning of like be a little selfish, understand why you're doing it, I bet you a lot of decisions will come more naturally. Right? Like I'm teaching yoga because it allows for this freedom of I can move around, I can start a business, I can work from home, I can be with my kids, I can work full-time or part, like whatever that is. And maybe you get joy out of like helping people, and that is what you need to feel fulfilled. So it's like, I think having that clarity and journaling on it when you need to make decisions, I bet you will just make, I'm not going to say easier because you're going to probably make tough choices, but like that true understanding. And I'm thinking of my partner where, you know, he's going to medical school, and, you know, they go through this like rigorous interview process. And what's the number one thing people say not to say for your interviews is, why do you want to be a doctor? I want to help people. Dude, everyone wants to help someone. You got to go deeper. You got to go deeper. So I'll leave it at that. But
Bingo. No, that's Ula. Thanks for the reminder. Because as you're saying that, I was like, oh my God, that's actually so much of why I even put Heart and Bones online in the first place. Because it was exactly like, so I'm no surprise you and I have similar life perspectives, because it was the same thing. It was like this world. So if this is helping anybody, it's like hearing that kind of genesis in our minds. You're right. That very clear first core thing, which was, this work people around the world want. So it like naturally lended itself, because at that time around 2017, there weren't many other people teaching in an anatomy informed way, and lots of people wanting that information. So therefore I stepped into that role of doing that. And then I was like, okay, great. It's naturally online. Like it naturally needs to reach people around the world. So it needs to be online. And then that means I could be wherever I want to be, because this is online. And those two things fully fed the momentum and clarity into how Heart and Bones became more online. So good. Yeah, that's a good example, because I forgot that was part of my impetus, because I think I'll default as I listen to this and teach it and be like, yes, helping others. And yeah, and like, of course, fundamentally, yes. And right. I had very clear goals for my life. I wanted that freedom of location freedom, let's say, and then subsequently got that. But you're right, that fed so much, because it even fed how we filmed the classes. Because I bet if I decided, if I was happy in the city that I had been living in at the time, I probably would have, or one possibility could have been, okay, well, we're going to make this very like so professional in the sense of like renting a studio every single time, having a professional camera crew, let's say, or just, you know, how some online studios and online yoga things have, they're more, there's always the same
Polished. It's
studio.
like
That
this, yeah,
polished
yeah.
is a good word. Yeah,
Edited
yeah,
and yeah,
yeah.
high production. Yeah.
Yeah. High production. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. And so I knew, okay, the trade-off of high production, aside from money, is I have to kind of stay in that spot, and then I have to have teachers in that same spot. And I knew I wanted the other teachers in the online studio. I didn't want to be location dependent, because I know a lot of really amazing teachers around the world who would be really great teachers inside of Heart and Bones. So what? Now we've got to take that fancy production to all the other cities around the world that they're living in to film. So that was unrealistic. But making the decision not to have it high production in that sense gave more freedom, because it still answered the first core impetus, which was, let's bring this online. I want to be free to be. And then that happened. That then I was able to, we traveled, my partner and kid and I traveled for a year while I was teaching in different cities around Europe and the UK. And I traveled with my camera gear in my backpack and filmed at the places. And it could still be a high production because the camera was good, not crappy, you know, iPhone, whatever it was at the time in 2018, iPhone 4, I don't know. Um, yeah. So yeah, I think, I don't know, I share that example because I think that was a good reminder of how actually, yes, intuition and slash, what are the goals? What do you want out of all of this? Ooh, so good. So yeah, I think like write down all those questions and write down like, how do I want to see my life in 5 years? In our teacher training, that's one of our questions when on the intake form, when people first sign up for the teacher training, one of the, they fill out this like reflective questionnaire. And one of the question is like, what does it look like in 5 years for you as a teacher? And quite often people in that question itself, they're like, oh, wait, I've never even thought about that. And then it's actually really beautiful to see what people write. And it's like, wow, okay, like, and they, you know, like they found that even just that one question. So maybe you could write that down. What does it look like in 5 years? What does your teaching look like? What do you want out of your life? In this one beautiful, gorgeous, amazing life that we have, how do you want it to look? How do you want it to feel?
I'm laughing because I wanted to end on a question that you kind of touched on already here, which is like looking ahead, haha. Looking ahead, what skills or strategies do you think will make teachers successful in the next 5 years? So it's a little bit different from what do you want versus, you know, you now have several decades, 2 decades of, you know, growth and teaching experience. Give us your wisdom, Brie. What are you thinking about? What are you looking at, you know, even for yourself? Like what are some skills you're like, okay, strategies?
That's a wild question. That's really good. That's really, again, these are all really big questions that would be lovely to have succinct answers to, but just really doesn't. So I'll try to be succinct if that's possible here. Okay, here's my most succinct version of that answer. And it's what we've been saying this whole conversation, which is just keep learning about yourself, keep doing your practice, keep showing up for yourself. Because when you can tune in to your own journey and when you prioritize yourself as like, who am I? What do I want? Who am I as a teacher? What do I want to teach? How do I want to teach? How do I want to help? How do I want to see what my life looks like? That's a practice of tuning in, right? That's that self-awareness practice that this practice of yoga is. And that's going to inform where and how you move forward, I feel. So I think it would go back to what we were saying around that tension of your intellectual and your intuition. And how can they find a sweet spot so that they're working together and that you can make decisions from that place? And then that will tell you what to do. Because what's Bree's wisdom, really? You know, like I could come up with a million ideas for you. Sure, fun, love that. I'll tell you where you should do in your life now. But I think you know best, and how you know best is to keep honing that intuition, honing that, and keep asking yourself that question. That's literally, again, 45 years so far. I have a track record of, well, let's just start from like 18 onwards to 45. So much of my life has come from that. How do I want to live? What's important to me? And I've been asking myself that question in some form or another, I think, since I've become an adult, whatever adult means. But, like since like, okay, 18, you're out in the world, you've left home. How do I want to be in this life? And I keep asking that, and I inform myself. And I could give you countless examples of times where the outside answer, the logical answer was completely different from what my heart said. And anybody actually, Brea, okay, fine. Let's end on this as our like high note, because this has to do with yoga. I was in university. First of all, school, I was never a great student. School was not my favorite place to be. I didn't succeed in traditional schooling, but I managed to get to university. And when I got to university, it was the best schooling experience I'd ever had, because I got to take courses that I thought were super interesting and I really loved. All my professors loved me. I had like straight A's. It was really a really great place for me. And that's when I started to get really into yoga as well. And then I went back home and got an opportunity to start teaching kids yoga. I don't care about kids yoga. I'm not a good kids yoga teacher. And this was a city that I had told myself I will never live in again. But I got this opportunity, and I hadn't considered teaching yoga at that point. And I had this moment of decision where it was very, very clear. I could, like, on the outside, it was like, Brea, go back to university. This has been really great for you. It was in a city that I loved. School was amazing. I was loving all of that. And then it was like, or go back to the city that you said you would never live in again. Start teaching not just yoga, but like kids yoga, a thing you don't actually care about. And so like any logical person would have looked and been like, well, Brea, what's your choice? It's pretty damn obvious. Get your university degree, go back to the place that you love. But this was one of those things where I tell you, and it was so clear. It was weird. It was like all signs point to going to back to school. And yet my heart was just shouting, like, go do this, teach yoga, move. And I did. And now here we are, right? Like, and now here we are. It all worked out perfectly. Like in the big picture, yeah. Like that's when I love that, because that was actually one of my first early life decisions of like trusting my gut, regardless of what logic said.
Wow. That's beautiful.
So, yeah. So I guess yoga had been very determined for me, and here we are. So I have a 1-year university experience, but I have a whole bunch of life experience.
Well, thank you so much for this, Brea. I feel like there's so many lessons people can take away from it. And if you loved this conversation and you want more, please listen to our many, 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 many episodes. But also, we have our yoga teacher training is open registration for the fall. So depending when you hear this, caveat, we do have our early bird pricing for the next couple of weeks. And then training will kick off in the fall. So I will include links in the description below so you can get all the information that you need. Did you want to add anything else, Brea?
Yeah, well, the early birds are going fast as well. So if you're hearing this quickly if this is 2025 in the summer and you're listening to it, grab those early birds quickly. If you're hearing this like a year later, if this is 2026 or 2027 or whatever year, we always have like early enrollment, so you can actually join this course, the teacher training, any time of year. Just reach out to hello@harmbonesyoga.com. But otherwise, if you are listening to this in real time, grab those early birds ASAP.
Oh, lovely. Well, thank you so much, Brea.
Thank you, Ula.